The baby in the drain wasn't abandoned. She was hidden, for a reason that terrifies the people who found her. The sun was barely up, casting a soft glow over the quiet suburban streets of Red Hollow. Officer Riley Johnson and her German Shepherd, Max, were on their usual morning patrol, moving through the neighborhood with the steady rhythm of a routine that felt like second nature. The air was crisp, the kind of morning that promised a calm day ahead. Max, as always, was by her side, his fur gleaming in the early light. Take a second to subscribe. It really helps. Thanks. Now, back to the story. It was a perfect start of the day, or so Riley thought. Max, however, was already on edge. He had been unusually restless ever since they left the station, his tail wagging sporadically and his eyes scanning the streets with attention she hadn't noticed before. Riley couldn't place it first, but something felt off. They rounded a corner, passing neatly trimmed lawns and well-maintained homes. Max's behavior grew more erratic as they approached the small park at the end of the block. He suddenly stopped, his ears perked and his body rigid. Riley looked down at him, instinctively tightening her grip on his leash. "What is it, boy?" she muttered, bending down to his level. Max's eyes were fixed on something ahead. His nose twitched, and before Riley could react, he started barking. It was the kind of bark that was sharp, urgent, a sound Riley had heard only in the heat of action, not on an ordinary morning. She followed his gaze and saw nothing at first, just an empty street and the usual patch of grass. But Max wasn't backing down. His barking grew louder, more insistent, as if he had caught the scent of something no one else could detect. Riley frowned and scanned the area, confused. Then she saw it, a storm drain at the edge of the sidewalk, its metal grate slightly ajar. Max was fixated on it, his bark echoing off the nearby houses. Riley tugged on his leash. "Max, come on," she said, but the dog wouldn't budge. Something was about to change, and Riley could feel it deep in her gut. The morning passed slowly, but Max's behavior did not let up. Riley tried to ignore it first, hoping it was just some fleeting moment of distraction. But by the time they reached the far end of the block, Max had not stopped barking at the storm drain. His growls now had an edge to them, more frantic than earlier, as if something was driving him to the brink. Riley had always trusted Max's instincts, but this felt different. She tugged on his leash again, pulling him gently away from the drain. But Max resisted, his muscles tense, his eyes wide and unblinking. He wasn't simply guarding something. He was reacting to something he couldn't explain, something beyond his usual patrol behavior. "Come on, Max," Riley said softly, trying to calm him, but the dog only barked louder, his paws digging into the pavement. She looked around, hoping someone might have noticed, but the street remained eerily quiet, the only sound the steady echo of Max's barking. Riley crouched down next to him, her hand resting on his fur. His breathing was rapid, almost as if he was in pain, but his focus never wavered from the drain. Max's ears were pressed back against his head, and his tail was stiff, making it clear this wasn't just a playful or territorial reaction. Something wasn't right. "Max, what's going on?" Riley murmured. She knew the dog, knew his quirks and his moods, but this was unlike anything she'd experienced with him before. She glanced down at the drain again, half expecting something to jump out at her, some animal or debris. But nothing stirred. Max's obsession with the storm drain became the center of Riley's thoughts. The deeper she thought about it, the more she felt something unusual lurking just beneath the surface of the ordinary. This wasn't just about a dog and a drain. It was as if Max was trying to warn her. Of what, though, Riley couldn't yet say. She had to find out, even if she didn't know where this strange path would lead. Riley stood by the storm drain, staring at Max as he continued to bark, his eyes locked on the opening as though something or someone was hiding inside. She pulled out her phone, making a quick call to the animal shelter to inquire if any wild animals might have gotten stuck in the drain. After a few minutes, she hung up, no closer to understanding the dog's behavior. Sighing, Riley glanced down the street. She could already feel the eyes of the neighborhood upon her, the sudden awkwardness of the situation settling in. People had begun to take notice, and the curious glances of a few passing neighbors made her wonder if they had witnessed Max's strange outburst before. Deciding she needed answers, Riley made her way to the Turner's house. Mrs. Turner was a longtime resident of Red Hollow, and Riley had often found her to be a source of reliable information about the neighborhood's happenings. She knocked on the door, the creaking sound of the old wood echoing in the quiet street. Mrs. Turner opened the door with a smile that quickly faded when she saw the expression on Riley's face. "Is everything all right, officer?" she asked, peering at Max as he stood rigid, still barking intermittently at the drain. Riley hesitated before answering. "Max won't stop barking at that storm drain. I've never seen him like this." Mrs. Turner's eyes widened, and she stepped aside, motioning for Riley to come in. "Well, I don't know if it's related, but there's been something strange going on in this neighborhood lately. I thought I was just imagining it, but I've heard odd noises near that drain late at night." Riley's curiosity piqued. "What kind of noises?" "Not like animals or people, more like whispers, almost, but too faint to make sense of. At first, I thought it was the wind or my hearing playing tricks on me, but after a while, I couldn't ignore it." Riley felt a chill run down her spine. She turned to Max, who was still staring at the drain, as though waiting for something to emerge. Maybe Mrs. Turner wasn't imagining things after all. Riley couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled in her chest after Mrs. Turner's story. The whispers, the strange noises, none of it made sense, but it felt like more than a coincidence. She decided it was time to investigate, and Max's behavior only strengthened her resolve. The dog had never acted like this before, and his instincts had always been reliable. Something about that storm drain, about this entire situation, was off. The next day, Riley returned to the neighborhood, determined to get to the bottom of it. She brought a flashlight, a camera, and Max, who, despite his usual calm demeanor, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. His barking had subsided, but his eyes remained fixed on the drain, his head occasionally tilting as if he was waiting for something to happen. Riley crouched by the drain and shone the flashlight inside. It was dark and damp, the smell of stale water and decaying leaves filling the air. She peered in, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Her heart began to race, the frustration mounting. Could it really be nothing? Max stood behind her, unusually still, his ears twitching at every sound. Riley didn't want to give up, so she grabbed her phone and called in a favor from Officer Dorian Fay, her young but sharp partner. A few minutes later, Dorian arrived, bringing along a small team from the fire department. They had brought the equipment to open the storm drain, just in case. Riley watched as they began the process of lifting the heavy grate. The tension in her stomach grew with each passing second. Inside, his flashlight scanning the murky darkness. Nothing. But Max was already moving, walking around the perimeter, sniffing the ground with purpose. Then, without warning, Max's ears perked up. He darted forward, his nose pressing to the ground. Riley's breath caught in her throat as she watched the dog dig at the dirt with urgency. Whatever was down there, it was more than just a drain. Something was buried, and Max knew it. Riley watched in silence as Max dug furiously at the edge of the drain, his paws moving rapidly through the dirt, kicking up clumps of soil with each frantic shove. The rest of the team stood around her, equally puzzled, unsure of what they were witnessing. Dorian stepped forward, his brow furrowed as he knelt down to help Max. "Careful, Riley," he said, his voice tinged with concern. "What's he after?" Riley didn't answer. She was too focused on Max, who now had his nose buried deep in the earth. His growls were low and persistent, his body quivering with anticipation. Riley knelt beside him, pulling at his leash to keep him steady. She knew Max wouldn't stop until he had uncovered whatever it was he was after. Then, with one final push, Max's paw hit something solid. Riley's heart skipped a beat as she watched the dirt shift to reveal a small, rectangular object buried just below the surface. Dorian reached in, carefully pulling the object out of the ground. As he held it up to the light, Riley's breath caught in her throat. It was a small, weathered metal box, its surface rusted and scratched from years of neglect. Dorian pried it open slowly, revealing a stack of old, yellowed papers sealed with a faded ribbon. Riley's pulse quickened. She had no idea what was inside, but she knew it was significant. Max, who had momentarily stopped digging, was now sitting beside her, his body tense. His gaze never wavered from the box. Riley took a deep breath before she carefully lifted the papers out of the box. They were covered in strange symbols, unfamiliar markings, and what looked like old photographs, the edges curling with age. Who would bury something like this? Riley muttered, almost to herself. Dorian shook his head, still staring at the box. This isn't just garbage. Someone went to great lengths to hide this. Riley felt a shiver run down her spine. Whoever had hidden this had done it for a reason, and now she was involved. The truth, whatever it was finally starting to surface. The air in the small clearing where they had found the box was thick with tension. Riley's mind raced as she examined the contents of the box, her fingers tracing the strange symbols on the papers. The photographs were of people she didn't recognize, their faces blurred by age and wear. But there was one that caught her attention, a man in military fatigues, standing in front of what appeared to be an abandoned building. The photo looked like it had been taken decades ago, and the man's eyes, though obscured by shadows, seemed to stare directly at her. "Do you think it's related to the missing persons case last year?" Dorian asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low, but his eyes were wide with curiosity and concern. The weight of their discovery was beginning to settle in on him, too. Riley didn't answer immediately. She was too focused on the photo. She turned it over, and that's when she saw the writing on the back. In faded ink, it simply said, "Find the drain." "She's waiting." Max whined softly at her side, his eyes darting between the box and the drain. He seemed agitated again, like he was sensing something she couldn't. Riley tucked the photo into her jacket and stood up, her thoughts swirling with possibilities. She knew the message was important, but it didn't make sense. Who was the she in the note? And why was it all connected to this storm drain? She glanced over at Dorian, who was still looking at the box in his hands. He was waiting for her to make a decision. It was clear that neither of them could leave this alone now. Whatever this was, it was too significant to ignore. She had no more. "We go in," Riley said, her voice steady, but there was a tremor beneath the surface. It wasn't just about the box anymore. It was about uncovering the mystery that had been hidden for so long. Max barked once, almost as if in agreement. Riley tightened her grip on his leash. "Let's see what's down there." Riley led the way back to the storm drain, the strange box and its cryptic contents still heavy in her hands. Max, now eerily calm, trotted ahead, his movements measured and deliberate, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Dorian followed closely behind, his flashlight cutting through the fading daylight as the sun sank lower in the sky. The drain, now more ominous than ever, loomed before them. Riley's heart beat faster as she approached, the sound of Max's calm footsteps somehow louder than they should have been. She glanced down at the metal grate, the edges corroded and rusted from years of neglect. The shadows seemed to deepen, as though the darkness inside was reaching out, pulling at her with an invisible force. Dorian kneeled beside the grate, checking it for any signs of tampering. "This doesn't look like it's been touched in years," he said, his voice laced with doubt. Riley wasn't so sure. Max was insistent. "There's something down there." With one final tug, Dorian lifted the grate, and they both peered inside. The tunnel beneath was pitch black, the smell of damp earth and stale water rising up in a musty cloud. Riley hesitated for a moment, then looked to Dorian. "I'm going in," she said, her voice quieter than she intended, as if the words themselves had weight. Dorian's eyes narrowed, concern flashing across his face. "I'm coming with you," he said, but Riley shook her head. "I'll go first," she insisted. She felt an unexplainable pull, like a thread tying her to the unknown darkness below. "Stay here with Max. I won't be long." She grabbed her flashlight and stepped into the tunnel, the beam of light cutting through the oppressive blackness. The walls were narrow, slick with moisture, and her footsteps echoed softly against the stone. She moved cautiously, scanning the passageway ahead. After several minutes of crawling through the damp space, her flashlight flickered over something, a glint of metal that caught the light. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a door, rusted and half buried in the earth, as if it had been hidden away for years. Riley's heart pounded harder. This was it. The door was a part of something bigger. She reached for the handle, her fingers trembling. Riley's hand gripped the cold, rusted handle of the door, her fingers trembling as she turned it. The creaking sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the narrow tunnel, amplifying the eerie silence that surrounded her. She pushed the door open slowly, the hinges protesting with a sharp squeal. Beyond the door was a small chamber, dimly lit by the weak beam of her flashlight. The air inside was musty, thick with the scent of old stone and decay, but something else lingered, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. Riley stepped inside, the crunch of her boots against the dirt floor the only sound breaking the stillness. As she moved deeper into the room, her light swept across the walls, revealing shelves lined with old boxes, papers, and faded photographs. But it was what lay at the center of the room that made her breath catch in her throat. At the far end, beneath a dusty tarp, was a small crib. Riley's heart skipped a beat as she moved closer, her flashlight illuminating the delicate shape of a baby, swaddled in blankets, lying perfectly still. The child was so small, barely a few months old, and despite the damp, cold surroundings, it was alive. Riley's instincts kicked in. She knelt beside the crib, her hand shaking as she reached out to check the baby's pulse. It was faint but steady. The child was breathing, a tiny rise and fall of the chest beneath the layers of fabric. A soft sigh escaped Riley's lips as she exhaled in relief, her heart hammering in her chest. Max, still by the drain, suddenly barked, sharp, urgent, as though sensing the moment Riley had found what she had been led to. She glanced over her shoulder, his eyes locked on her, his tail stiff with alertness. This doesn't make sense, Riley murmured under her breath, her mind struggling to grasp what was happening. Who would leave a baby here? And why? She gently lifted the baby from the crib, feeling the soft weight in her arms. And for the first time in a long while, Riley knew this was no ordinary discovery. A miracle had been hidden in the dark, waiting to be found. Riley cradled the tiny baby in her arms, the fragile life so warm against her chest despite the chill in the air. The baby's small, delicate features were peaceful, unaware of the danger it had been in just moments before. Riley's mind raced as she stood in the cold, dark room, still unable to fully process what had just happened. How could a child be left in a place like this? Who had done this and why? Max, standing at the doorway, barked again, this time with more urgency. Riley's thoughts snapped back to the present. She couldn't waste any more time in this forgotten place. She needed to get the baby to safety. Now, she turned quickly, cradling the baby gently as she moved back toward the tunnel's entrance. Max trotted beside her, his movements purposeful, never straying from her side. Riley felt the weight of the baby's tiny body in her arms, but her heart pounded with a sense of responsibility she had never felt before. She wasn't just holding a life. She was holding the key to something much bigger, something that had been buried for far too long. Dorian was waiting outside the tunnel, his face pale as he saw Riley emerging with the baby. His eyes widened in shock, and he immediately stepped forward, concern written all over his features. "Riley, is it a baby?" His voice was barely above a whisper, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Riley nodded, her voice tight as she spoke. "Yes, she was in there alone. I don't know how, but she's alive. We need to get her to the hospital immediately." Dorian didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and called for an ambulance, his hands trembling as he relayed the details to the dispatcher. Riley held the baby closer, her heart beating in sync with the infant's slow, steady breaths. Max stayed close, his ears alert, never straying far from Riley. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that this was only the beginning of something much more dangerous. The hospital was only a few miles away, but every second felt like an eternity. Riley sat in the waiting room, her hands clenched tightly around the baby's small blanket. The sterile, harsh lights overhead felt suffocating, and the quiet hum of hospital machines did little to calm the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. Dorian stood beside her, occasionally pacing, his expression tight with worry. Max, unusually quiet, lay at her feet, his head resting on her lap, never taking his eyes off the baby. Riley stroked Max's fur absent-mindedly, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that the baby's arrival wasn't a random occurrence. There had to be more to it. The door to the waiting room swung open, and Dr. Helen Marks, a pediatrician from the emergency department, entered with a solemn expression. Her white coat was stained with a few marks, as though she had been in the middle of something critical when Riley and Dorian had arrived. "Officer Johnson?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Riley stood, holding her breath as she faced the doctor. "How is she?" Riley asked. Try to keep her voice steady. Dr. Marks paused for a moment before speaking, her gaze flicking to the baby, who was now being monitored in the intensive care unit. "She's stable for now," the doctor said, her tone measured. "Her vitals are strong, though she's severely underweight and dehydrated. But there are no signs of trauma or injury. It's a miracle she made it this far." Riley let out a sigh of relief, but it was only brief. "What does that mean for her future?" Dr. Marks hesitated. "There's something unusual about her, though. Her blood work, it came back with some strange results." She paused again, glancing at Dorian before continuing. "We're running additional tests, but we're seeing markers that we don't typically see in a normal child. It's troubling." Riley's stomach churned. "What kind of markers?" The doctor sighed, her face unreadable. "I can't say yet, but there's something different about her. Something unnatural." Riley's blood ran cold. This was only the beginning. Riley couldn't shake the doctor's words from her mind. Unnatural. It echoed in her thoughts as she sat by the baby's side in the dimly lit hospital room. The soft beep of machines monitoring the infant's vitals was the only sound, but it felt as though the entire world had gone silent around her. Something was wrong with this child, and the more Riley thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't explain why she felt so connected to her. Max, ever loyal, sat at her feet, his gaze fixed on the baby as though guarding her from some unseen threat. Riley absent-mindedly scratched behind his ears, but her mind was far from the present moment. She had been trained to trust her instincts, and something about this situation felt increasingly dangerous. The hospital room door opened slowly, and Dorian stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He didn't sit, just stood near the door, arms crossed, as if he was guarding the room just as Max was. "What did Dr. Marks say?" he asked, his voice low. Riley's eyes lifted to meet his. "She's stable for now, but they're running more tests. There's something in her blood, something that doesn't belong there." Dorian frowned. "You mean like a mutation?" Riley shook her head, her fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket. "I don't know, but I'm starting to think there's more to this than a baby being abandoned in a drain. Someone must have put her there for a reason. Someone who doesn't want her found." Dorian's gaze sharpened. "You think this is connected to what we found in the box?" Riley nodded slowly. The symbols on those papers, those photographs, they were all linked to something hidden. And that message, "She's waiting." Maybe this is what they meant. Dorian's eyes flicked to Max, who had begun to growl low in his throat. Riley stood abruptly, her heart racing. She could feel it now. Someone was coming. And whatever had been hidden was about to be revealed. The hospital room felt colder now, a chilling sense of impending danger hanging in the air. Riley watched Max as he paced back and forth by the door, his eyes darting between the baby and the hallway outside. His low growl was almost constant, the hair along his back standing up like he was anticipating something that neither Riley nor Dorian could see. His instincts were on edge, and Riley knew better than to dismiss them. Max had always been more than a partner to her. He had saved her life more times than she could count, and their bond went beyond mere training. He knew her better than anyone, understood her moods, and often sensed danger before she could. But now he seemed to be fixated on the baby, a fixation that wasn't just protective but almost possessive. Riley moved closer to the bed, her hand gently resting on the baby's small, fragile chest. The child, whose name they still didn't know, lay peacefully asleep, her tiny breaths steady despite everything that had happened. Max's growls softened as he approached her, his eyes never leaving the infant's face. Riley watched, puzzled, as Max sat beside the crib, lowering his head to sniff the air around the baby. Dorian, standing by the door with his arms crossed, noticed the change too. "He's never reacted like this before, has he?" he asked quietly, watching Max's every move. Riley shook her head. "No, not like this. He's attached to her. Like he's protecting her, but it's more than that." Max's attention remained unwavering, and Riley felt an odd pull as she watched him. She didn't know why, but something in her gut told her that this bond between Max and the baby was no accident. There was something deeper at play, something neither of them could fully understand. It wasn't just a dog protecting a helpless child. It was as though Max recognized something in her, something that connected them in a way that couldn't be explained. Riley knelt beside Max, her hand resting on his back. "What do you know, boy?" she whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. Max's gaze met hers, and for a fleeting moment, she could have sworn he understood exactly what she was asking. Riley sat in the sterile quiet of the hospital room, her mind racing. Max was now lying at her feet, eyes fixed on the baby, a sense of calm settling over him. Yet Riley could feel the tension in the air, thick and unresolved. She hadn't imagined it. There was something about this baby, something about the way Max was so drawn to her. It was more than mere protection. There was a hidden connection, one that Riley couldn't fully grasp but felt deep within her bones. Her fingers absently traced the edges of the mysterious papers from the box, now spread out on the desk beside the bed. The symbols, the photographs, the cryptic message, all of it pointed to something far more dangerous and complex than anyone could have anticipated. The baby, the storm drain, Max's reaction, none of it made sense on its own, but together it was a puzzle that needed solving. Dorian, who had been quietly observing Max, broke the silence. "You're thinking the same thing I am, aren't you?" His voice was low, a hint of uncertainty in it. Riley looked up, meeting his gaze. "That Max knows something we don't. That he's not just protecting this baby. He's drawn to her for a reason." Dorian nodded slowly. "You think the baby's connected to those files we found?" Riley stared at the baby, who had shifted slightly in her sleep, her tiny hand curled around the edge of the blanket. "Yes," she whispered. "Somehow, I think she is." Max lifted his head, his ears perked as if sensing the shift in conversation. Riley reached down, placing a hand gently on his back. She could feel the subtle tremor in his muscles, like he was bracing for something, even though the room remained quiet. Dorian stepped closer, glancing down at the baby. "What if she's connected to something bigger, something much darker?" he asked quietly. "What if this is more than just a random act of abandonment?" Riley's stomach churned at the thought. "I think it is," she said, her voice firm now. "We need to figure out what that connection is, and fast. Whoever's behind this won't stop looking for her." Max stood up, his eyes never leaving the baby. His growl was low but certain. The hunt was just beginning. The hospital room door creaked open, and Riley looked up, startled. A woman stood in the doorway, her figure framed by the harsh fluorescent light from the hallway. She was tall, with dark, unkempt hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, and her expression was one of quiet urgency. There was something unsettling about her, an air of knowing, as if she was already familiar with everything that had transpired. "Officer Johnson," the woman's voice was smooth, calm, but there was a faint tremor beneath it. "I need to speak with you." Riley's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting questions from law enforcement or even news outlets by now, but this was different. She stood, instinctively stepping closer to the crib where the baby lay. Max lifted his head, his eyes narrowing on the woman as a low growl rumbled in his throat. The woman didn't flinch. She merely stepped forward, her gaze softening, as though she had seen Max's kind of reaction before. "Who are you?" Riley asked, her voice steady but tinged with suspicion. The woman hesitated for a moment, glancing at the baby in the crib before meeting Riley's eyes. "My name is Rachel Ashford," she said, her voice laced with a quiet desperation. "And I'm here for her." Riley froze. "Ashford?" The name struck her like a bolt of lightning. The baby. Could this woman really be her mother? No, the baby had been abandoned. But something in Rachel's eyes, something in the way she spoke, made Riley hesitate. I don't understand, Riley said slowly, her eyes flicking between Rachel and the baby. You're saying you know her? Rachel nodded, her face a mask of pain and regret. She's my daughter, but you don't understand. She was supposed to be kept safe. I thought she was hidden. I didn't think anyone would find her. Riley's thoughts scrambled as she processed the woman's words. Was Rachel telling the truth? Or was this just another layer to the mystery they were only beginning to unravel? Max stood now, alert and tense, as though he, too, was questioning Rachel's intentions. I need to know everything, Riley said, her voice firm, starting with how you know about her. Rachel's face twisted with a mixture of guilt and fear, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She stepped closer to the crib, her hand hovering over the baby as if she were afraid to touch her. Riley stood her ground, watching the woman carefully, unsure of whether to trust her or not. I didn't want anyone to know, Rachel began, her voice barely above a whisper. But now I don't have a choice. Riley crossed her arms, her stance unwavering. What are you talking about? You can't just show up here and claim this baby as yours without explaining how you knew she was here, let alone what happened to her. Rachel's eyes flickered to the door, her posture tense, as though she expected someone else to enter at any moment. I was part of something dangerous. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I tried to protect her, but they didn't give me a choice. She took a deep breath, collecting herself before continuing. Riley leaned in, her curiosity now fully piqued. What do you mean? What happened? Rachel's voice shook. I was involved in a project, a government project, but it wasn't like anything you would know about. They experimented on us, Riley. I didn't realize what it would mean for the child I carried. They told me it would be safe, that she'd have a normal life. But they were wrong. Riley's mind raced, piecing together the bits of information she had gathered. A government project? The baby's blood work, the strange symbols on the papers. They all pointed to something far beyond the ordinary. They've been tracking her, Rachel continued, her eyes growing wild with panic. They never stopped. She's not just a normal child. She's a product of something they created. And now they want her back. They want to finish what they started. Riley felt a chill run down her spine. Who wants her back? Rachel hesitated, fear flashing in her eyes. The people behind the project. They're called RAON. They're the reason she was hidden, why I had to keep her from the world. But now that you found her, they won't stop until they take her back. Max growled low, sensing the gravity of Rachel's words. Riley felt the weight of the truth settle over her. The fight for the baby's safety was just beginning. Riley's heart pounded in her chest as Rachel's words sank in. Ring. The name sounded like a ghost, something buried in the past, yet too dangerous to ignore. She watched Rachel carefully, her mind churning with the implications. Who were these people? Why had they created the child Riley now cradled? And why were they willing to go to such lengths to get her back? Rachel stood beside the crib, her face pale as she avoided Riley's gaze. I never wanted any of this to happen, she said, her voice raw with regret. When they told me about the project, I was naive. They said it was for the greater good, that they were trying to make something better. But I never thought about what that would mean for my child. Tell me everything, Riley said, her voice low but steady. We need to understand this before it's too late. Rachel nodded, her hands trembling as she wrapped her fingers around the edge of the crib. I wasn't supposed to be part of the project, but they chose me because of my genetic profile. They wanted women with specific traits, and they kept us isolated. We never knew the full extent of what was happening. They manipulated us, controlled us. She paused, her lips tightening. I thought I was just pregnant, carrying a normal child. But when Lily was born, I realized how wrong I'd been. Riley's eyes flicked to the baby, her heart heavy with the weight of what Rachel had just shared. Lily. The baby had a name now, but that didn't ease the unease settling in her gut. The project wasn't about advancing medicine or saving lives, Rachel continued, her voice barely above a whisper. It was about creating something powerful, something that could be controlled. Lily was the first success, the first child born from the program. I didn't know at the time, but she was designed for something far beyond what I ever imagined. Riley's breath caught as she pieced it together. Lily wasn't just a child. She was a creation, a weapon. And the people behind this project would stop at nothing to reclaim her. Riley sat in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of Rachel's revelation. Lily wasn't just a child. She was a product of something far more sinister, engineered for purposes Riley couldn't yet comprehend. As the words hung in the air, Riley's gaze drifted to Max, who had been unusually quiet since Rachel's admission. His eyes were fixed on Lily, his body rigid with a mix of alertness and something else, something deep, primal. Riley's mind raced. What did Max know? He had been so drawn to Lily from the moment they found her. And now she realized it wasn't just his protective instincts at work. He wasn't just guarding her. He seemed to understand something that none of them could yet grasp. Max, Riley murmured, kneeling beside him. She ran her fingers through his fur, but his focus never wavered from the baby. His muscles were tense, coiled, as if waiting for something to happen. He had been so protective, so attached to Lily, but now it seemed as if he was in tune with her on a level Riley couldn't explain. "Why are you so fixated on her, boy?" Riley whispered, her voice quiet, almost pleading for answers. Max lifted his head, his eyes locking with hers. It was as if he understood her words, as if he knew the questions Riley was grappling with. He let out a low growl, not out of aggression, but with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. Dorian, who had been standing by the door, stepped forward. "What do you think he knows, Riley?" Riley looked at Max, then back at Dorian. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's like he's more than just protective of her. It's deeper than that." She paused, trying to make sense of the bond between them. It's as if he recognizes something in her, maybe even a connection from the past. Rachel's voice trembled as she spoke up. "Max is a part of the reason I kept her hidden for so long." She took a deep breath before continuing. "The program, they didn't just work with humans. They experimented with animals too. Max, he's connected to Lily in ways I still don't fully understand." Riley's breath caught. This was no coincidence. Max's role in the mystery was just beginning to unfold. Riley stood at the hospital window, her eyes scanning the parking lot below. The wind outside had picked up, rustling the trees and sending a chill through the room. Max lay at her feet, his tail twitching restlessly, still focused on Lily, who was now resting peacefully in her crib. Riley couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were being watched. The shadows of the past were closing in, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the people responsible for Lily's creation would make their move. Dorian approached her from behind, holding a stack of papers. "We've got something," he said, his voice clipped, urgency in his tone. Riley turned toward him, her gaze sharp. "What did you find?" Dorian handed her the papers. "I traced a few leads from the information Rachel gave us. It's not much, but there's a connection to a shadow company called Cure Solutions. It was listed as a logistics firm, but we can't track any real operations. What we did find, though, is that it was a front for a series of black funding initiatives tied to RAON. They've been using it to cover their tracks for years." Riley felt the blood drain from her face. "RAON, they're still active?" Dorian nodded. "Worse, I've confirmed that they've been keeping tabs on Lily. They've been monitoring the hospital for the past 48 hours. Whoever's behind this knows exactly where we are, and they're closing in fast." Riley's grip on the papers tightened. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, the stakes higher than ever. Max's growl interrupted her thoughts, and she looked down to see him standing, his eyes darting toward the door. A chill ran down her spine. "They're here," Riley muttered. Dorian stepped back, pulling his gun from its holster. "We need to move fast. There's no time to waste." Riley nodded, her mind already calculating the next steps. "We'll track them down before they get any closer. We're not letting them take Lily." They gathered what little they could, prepared to fight their way through whatever came next. But as they left the room, Riley felt the sharp sting of realization. The battle was no longer just about survival. It was about bringing an end to something far darker than she could have ever imagined. Riley moved swiftly down the hospital corridors, Max right by her side, his every muscle tensed, his eyes darting between the shadows. They had to get out, had to move fast before whoever was tracking them closed in. But as they reached the exit, Max suddenly stopped in his tracks, his body rigid. He was staring intently at the hallway just ahead, his ears pinned back. Riley felt the shift in the air. Something was off. She reached down, placing a hand on Max's back, but he didn't budge. He was alert, focused on something that Riley couldn't see. She followed his gaze, her pulse quickening as she glanced around. No one was there, but the feeling in the pit of her stomach told her otherwise. Dorian, who had been a few steps ahead, turned to look back at them. "What's wrong with him?" he asked, his voice low but edged with concern. Riley's heart skipped a beat. He's sensing something. He knows we're not alone. As if to confirm her suspicions, a distant sound echoed down the hallway. The clack of boots, the faintest whisper of a presence. Riley's grip tightened on her gun, and Max's low growl filled the silence. He was more than a dog. He was more than just her partner. He was something else entirely, and Riley felt it now more than ever. Dorian stepped forward cautiously. "You think he's been part of this all along?" His voice was tentative, as though he wasn't sure how to say the words. Riley took a deep breath, glancing down at Max. The dog's eyes met hers, and in that moment, she realized the truth. Max wasn't just a trained animal. He was part of something bigger, something that connected him to Lily and to the people behind this entire mess. Max wasn't just guarding Lily, Riley said quietly. He was chosen for her. He's part of the same project, somehow linked to the genetic experiments. Dorian's eyes widened. "You're saying he's a product too?" Riley nodded slowly, the weight of the truth settling over her like a heavy blanket. Max wasn't just following his instincts. He had been part of the very same design that had created Lily. He had been sent to protect her, and now, Riley realized he was their key to unlocking the full truth. Riley's heart pounded as she moved through the hospital's back hallways, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Max was ahead of her, his movements fluid and purposeful, a silent guardian with his instincts honed to an almost supernatural degree. They were being watched, she knew it. The feeling gnawed at her like a persistent itch, and with every step, the tension in her chest grew tighter. Dorian was close behind, his steps cautious but determined. "We've traced them to a vehicle in the parking garage," he said, his voice a sharp whisper. "They're on the move. We need to act fast." Riley nodded, her hand resting on her gun. She knew the stakes now more than ever. They weren't just facing a few rogue agents or criminals. This was something much bigger, a secret program, a covert operation that had been hidden for years, and Lily, the key to it all. Whoever had created her, whoever had set this all in motion, wasn't going to let her slip through their fingers without a fight. As they approached the stairwell that led to the parking garage, Max stopped again, his body rigid. He was listening for something, his ears flicking back and forth. Riley held her breath, waiting. Then, without warning, Max darted toward the door, growling low and deep. Riley's heart skipped a beat. They were close. Too close. "Get ready," Riley muttered to Dorian, her hand tightening on her weapon. She pushed the door open slowly, her eyes scanning the dimly lit garage. A few cars were parked haphazardly, but the faint sound of footsteps echoed from a corner just ahead. They weren't alone. From the shadows, figures emerged. 3 men, all wearing tactical gear, their movements deliberate and cold. One of them stepped forward, his eyes locking with Riley's. A chill ran down her spine. He was familiar. She had seen him before, but she couldn't place where. "You've made a mistake, officer," the man said, his voice calm, almost patronizing. "This child isn't yours to protect, and neither are you." Riley's grip on her gun tightened. "I don't make mistakes," she said, her voice cold as steel. "Now step aside." The man smiled, a thin, calculated grin. "This isn't over, Riley. It's only just begun." With a sudden motion, the standoff erupted into chaos. The air in the parking garage was thick with tension, every breath feeling heavier than the last. Riley's heart pounded in her chest as the man who had spoken, the leader of the group, took a step forward, his hand resting on the grip of a concealed weapon. Max stood at Riley's side, his body taut, ready to spring into action. Dorian, close behind, shifted his stance, his gun trained on the approaching men. "This doesn't have to escalate," the leader said, his tone too calm, as if he knew something they didn't. "You can hand over the child, and we'll leave peacefully. No one needs to get hurt." Riley's jaw clenched, her finger inching toward the trigger. "I'm not handing her over to anyone. Not now, not ever." The man's eyes narrowed. "You're out of your depth, officer. You have no idea what you're dealing with. You think this is just about a baby? This is bigger than you, bigger than anything you could imagine." Dorian moved slightly, his voice low but steady. "We know more than you think, and we're not backing down." The standoff hung in the air, thick and electric, but then, just as the tension seemed to reach its breaking point, something in Max shifted. He broke away from Riley, moving swiftly toward the man in the center. The dog's growl was sharp, primal, and with a burst of speed, Max lunged at the leader's legs, knocking him to the ground with surprising force. The other two men reacted instantly, pulling their guns, but Riley was faster. In a single, fluid motion, she disarmed one, knocking him to the ground with a twist of his arm. Dorian was right behind her, taking down the second man with a swift blow to the chest. The leader, still on the ground, scrambled backward, his face twisted in disbelief. Riley stood over him, her gun trained on his chest. "You're done," she said coldly. "Now talk. Who sent you? And why Lily?" For a moment, the man hesitated, but then the corner of his mouth twitched upward, almost in amusement. "You really don't know, do you?" he sneered. "This isn't over. It's only beginning. The breakthrough isn't just about finding her. It's about awakening her." Riley's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" The man's eyes gleamed. "She's the key, Riley, to everything." And with that, he fell silent, as though the truth had already slipped from his grasp. Riley stood frozen, her gun still aimed at the leader, her mind whirling with the man's last words. "She's the key." The words echoed in her mind like a drumbeat, the weight of them sinking deeper into her gut with every passing second. She didn't understand. What did he mean by awakening? And why was Lily the key? Max growled, his eyes fixed on the man still sprawled on the concrete. But Riley's focus never wavered. The garage was eerily quiet now, save for the soft hum of the overhead lights and the distant sound of sirens growing louder. They didn't have much time before more of his people showed up. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. "You're not going anywhere until you tell me what you know," Riley said, her voice steady, even though her pulse was racing. She was close to the truth, but there was still so much she didn't understand. The leader laughed, a low, hollow sound that sent a chill down her spine. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said, sitting up slowly, his eyes glinting with something dark. "She's not just the key to some old project. She's the key to a new world. Everything changes when she awakens. You think this was all random? You think she was accidentally left in that drain?" Riley's grip tightened on her gun. "What did you do to her?" she demanded. The man's grin widened. "She doesn't even know yet. But when she does, the world will change. It's all part of the plan." Riley's stomach twisted with dread. Whatever they had planned for Lily, it wasn't just about her. It was about power, control, and something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Dorian stepped forward, his voice low. "We're done talking. You're going to tell us everything. Now." The leader stood, his hands raised in mock surrender, but his expression was anything but defeated. "You think this is a victory? You think you've won?" His eyes narrowed. "The true test is just beginning. You're not ready for what's coming." Before Riley could react, a sharp noise rang out from the corner of the garage. More men, emerging from the shadows, their weapons raised. The showdown had only just begun. The new arrivals moved quickly, their footsteps echoing against the concrete, their faces obscured by dark masks. Riley's heart raced as she counted at least 5 more armed men converging on them. Her grip on her gun tightened, her mind racing for strategy. There was no way they'd be able to take them all down. Not like this. Not without backup. Max let out a low growl, his hackles raised, every muscle coiled as though he knew what was coming. Riley's first instinct was to move closer to the baby. Lily was still back in the hospital room, vulnerable. She couldn't let these men get to her. But just as she shifted her focus to Dorian, the unexpected happened. The leader of the group, the one who had been taunting them moments before, took a step back, his hands still raised. But instead of looking like he was backing down, he was looking at something behind them, something that made him pause, his eyes widening. "Don't shoot," he yelled, his voice suddenly sharp and panicked. Riley's blood ran cold. Before she could react, a new figure stepped into view, emerging from the shadows of the parking garage like a specter. A tall woman, dressed in tactical gear, her face hidden behind a black mask. But it wasn't just her appearance that threw Riley off. It was the presence she exuded, the quiet command in her movements. She stepped forward with calculated ease, her gaze locking with Riley's as if she had already anticipated their every move. The leader seemed to shrink back. "You?" he said, his voice a mixture of awe and fear. The woman said nothing at first, her attention fixed entirely on Riley. Slowly, she reached in her jacket, pulling out something that made Riley's stomach drop. It was a flash drive, marked with the same strange symbols that had appeared on the papers they'd found earlier. She held it out in front of Riley, her expression unreadable. "Take it," the woman said, her voice cold. "And everything changes, but don't trust anyone." Riley stared at her, her mind reeling. Who was she? And what did this flash drive mean for Lily's future? Before she could respond, the woman was gone, melting back into the shadows as quickly as she had appeared. The unexpected twist had just begun. Riley stood frozen, the flash drive in her hand, her mind reeling from the woman's cryptic warning. But don't trust anyone. The words echoed in her mind, adding weight to the already overwhelming situation. Max stood by her side, his eyes narrowed, his body tense. Even he seemed unsettled by the mysterious woman's sudden appearance and disappearance. The leader, still on the ground, watched with an almost resigned expression. "You think you're ready for what's coming next?" he asked, his voice hoarse but mocking. "That flash drive won't change a thing. It's too late." Riley's grip on the drive tightened, her knuckles white. She didn't know what was on it yet, but she knew it was important. It was her only lead, the only way to uncover what had been hidden for so long. She wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. Dorian stepped forward, his gun still drawn, eyes scanning the new arrivals. "We need to move. Now." Riley nodded, not taking her eyes off the leader. "Get ready. We're not done here yet." They moved quickly, but cautiously, Riley leading the way. The weight of the moment pressed down on her as they exited the garage. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The leader's words haunted her. "It's too late." What did that mean? What had they unleashed by finding Lily? They made their way to the back of the hospital, where the security office awaited them. Riley inserted the flash drive into a terminal, her fingers shaking slightly. The screen flickered for a moment before a series of files began to load. A document popped up, one marked with a seal she recognized. It was an old government document, one from a program that had been buried long ago. As she scrolled through the data, her eyes widened in shock. It was all there: Lily's connection to the project, the experiments, the truth about the program they'd uncovered. But there was more, something she hadn't anticipated. A countdown timer, ticking down. The final move was coming, and this time, Riley wasn't sure if they'd be ready for it. Riley stared at the screen, the countdown timer ticking relentlessly toward 0. Her pulse quickened as the implications of the data began to settle in. The program, the experiments, Lily, everything was connected, and now they were on the brink of something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. She felt a cold sweat form on the back of her neck as the clock counted down, but she forced herself to remain calm. Dorian stood beside her, his hand resting on his gun, eyes scanning the room. Max was unusually still, his gaze locked on Lily, who was still sleeping soundly in the other room. For a moment, Riley allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. They had come so far. They had uncovered the truth, confronted the enemy, and even found the pieces that had been hidden for so long. But now, Everything rested on one final step. Is there anything we can do to stop it? Dorian asked, his voice tight with concern. Riley didn't answer immediately. She was piecing it together in her mind, the fragments of the past and the present swirling in a tangled mess. The countdown wasn't just some random measure of time. It was a trigger, a final step in whatever experiment they had been trying to complete. But the data also revealed something else. They had the power to reverse it. They could stop it. Her finger hovered over the keyboard as she made a decision. Yes, she said, her voice low but determined. We can stop this. We have the files, the evidence. We can expose everything. She hit the key, and the countdown froze. The room fell silent, the weight of their victory sinking in. Max let out a low, contented whine, sensing the shift in the air. They had done it. As the tension in the room began to lift, Riley took a deep breath, her eyes lingering on Lily, who was still sleeping peacefully. The storm wasn't over, but the worst of it had passed. For the first time in a long time, Riley allowed herself to believe in something. Hope. They had a new beginning, and this time, they would control their own fate.